Hi all, in this week's discussion board, we're going to take a look at adding in the vocabulary and academic language and the questions for higher order thinking and assessment. Now, there's a couple things I want to point out that are on our TFC rubric, and I want to make sure you're aware of them. And part one under vocabulary, you need to list the necessary vocabulary terms and their definitions. Notice that, and their definitions for this lesson. And then part two, you need to describe what opportunities you will provide to practice this language and vocabulary and for students to develop fluency in your classroom. And then next, under your questions for higher order thinking and assessment, these cannot be answered with yes or no. What questions could you ask students to encourage their higher order thinking? And you also in this one need to include possible correct answers. If you just give the questions and don't give the possible correct answers, you can't receive full credit for this. So these must be present in the instruction or during the practice activity portions of the lesson plan. So if you're giving me questions here, I want to be able to see these questions in the written version of the lesson plan as well. So let's take a closer look. So vocabulary, academic language. We're talking about terms that are specific to the content or the process or the skills being taught. For example, in math, you're looking at denominators, numerators, in English, possessive pronouns or modifiers, in history, emancipation. These are terms your students need to know. Science, mitochondria. What terms do your students need to know? And then give them the definitions in a way that they can understand. And then this could also include key historical figures as well in your vocabulary. You need to know who certain people are in order to understand the context of what's happening. And when you're giving this, you need to consider the age and the development of your students with the answers that you're giving. So now, questions for higher order thinking. What can you ask students to check on their critical thought process? Now, like our essential questions, these cannot be answered with yes or no. And the goal is to have at least 3 of these higher level thinking questions per lesson. Can you have more? Yes. Can you have less? No. So the goal is to have 3. And then you can ask questions like, what strategy did you use to answer this question? Or if you were such and such a person, what would you have done to resolve the conflict? Those are all examples of higher order thinking questions. So if you've got mathematically, think about in terms of an equation. You have your question stem, and then what you want them to know, combine them together. And the question stems, you can use those Bloom verbs again to help you get those higher level thinking skills using those. So here's an example. The question stem, how would you improve? And then what do you want them to know? Your muscular endurance to become a better football player. So that's an example of the higher order thinking question. And remember, when you give those, give some possible responses too.